Do not look at her too long, a woman murmured behind a painted fan. The poor creature thinks the candlelight hides what she is. Beatrice heard every word. She always heard them. She kept her eyes on the hem she had stitched that afternoon, the one now swirling about the shoulders of Lady Marchmore, and she did not let her chin drop a single degree. The burn scar along her left wrist throbbed beneath her glove, the way it always did when she was watched, as though her skin remembered the fire even when no one else could see it. She had not wanted to come. A seamstress did not belong in the ballroom of Thornwood Hall. But Lady Marchmore had insisted she attend in case a seam tore mid-dance, and so Beatrice stood pressed against the wall between two marble pillars, a servant in a borrowed grey gown, listening to her betters decide she was nothing. "Unmarriageable," another voice said, and laughed. I heard the milliner say it plainly. 25, no dowry, and that hand. Who would have her? Beatrice folded the offending hand against her skirt and breathed. She had learned long ago that grief and shame both passed faster if one simply kept still. Then the music faltered. It did not stop exactly. It thinned the way a room thins when every head turns at once. Beatrice looked up and saw why. The Iron Duke of Thornwood had entered his own ballroom. They called him Iron for the cold of him. He had buried a wife and a brother in the same winter, men said, and had not smiled since. He wore black where other gentlemen wore colour, and his face was all hard plains and shadow, his dark eyes moving over the assembly as though he were counting his enemies. Mothers steered their daughters into his path the way generals move troops. He passed them all without a flicker. Beatrice pressed herself smaller against the pillar. She had altered the very coat he wore. 3 weeks past kneeling on his study floor with pins in her mouth, while he stood like carved stone above her and never once spoke. She had thought he had not noticed her at all. His gaze swept the room. It stopped. On her. She felt it land the way one feels a window thrown open in winter. The breath went out of her. Surely he looked past her at some lord behind at the door, but his eyes did not move on. They held hers across the whole glittering length of the floor, over the heads of the dancing and the sneering and the bored, and something in them was not cold at all. The fan women noticed. Of course they noticed. "He cannot mean to look there," Lady Marchmore said, loud enough to wound. "Your Grace," she called, gliding forward, her diamonds throwing fire. "You must allow me to present my niece. She has waited all evening." In a moment. His voice was low and even, and it silenced her completely. He was walking. Beatrice's heart began a hard, frightened gallop. The Duke of Thornwood was crossing his own ballroom, and he was crossing it toward the wall, toward the pillars, toward the grey-gowned seamstress who had no business being seen. The crowd parted before him in a hush of silk, heads swiveled. Someone gasped. He did not slow. "Your Grace," Beatrice managed, and dropped into a curtsy so deep she feared she would not rise from it. "Forgive me. I attend Lady Marchmore only. I shall remove myself at once." "You will not." She straightened. He stood close now, closer than any gentleman had stood to her in years, and she could see the faint scar through one dark brow, the wariness around his eyes that the candlelight could not soften. He was looking at her as though no one else were in the room. "You altered my coat," he said. "Yes, Your Grace." "You did not speak the entire afternoon." "It was not my place to speak, Your Grace." "No." Something moved at the corner of his hard mouth, and yet I have thought of little else since, of the woman who knelt on my floor and mended me and asked for nothing and would not look up. He paused. "I asked the housekeeper your name, Beatrice." To hear it in his mouth undid something in her chest. She had not heard her own name spoken with gentleness in a very long time. "They are saying things about you tonight," he went on quieter. "I have heard them. The whole room has heard them." Shame flooded her face hot. "Your Grace, please. You need not." "Give me your hand." She went still. "Your Grace?" "Your hand." He held out his own, broad and steady, palm up, there before the entire watching aristocracy of 3 counties. The left. Her breath stopped altogether. The left, the one she hid, the one they whispered about, the one she had not bared to a living soul since the fire took her mother's cottage and left its mark burned into her wrist forever. "You do not know what you ask," she whispered. "I know precisely what I ask." The room had gone wholly silent now. Even the musicians had let their bows fall. Lady Marchmore stood frozen with her niece's arm in a death grip. 100 faces watched hungry, certain they were about to see the seamstress shamed at last, the Iron Duke about to expose the creature's deformity for sport. Beatrice looked into his eyes, and she saw that they were wrong. All of them. There was no cruelty in him. There was something far more frightening. There was hope. Slowly, with a hand that trembled, she peeled the grey glove from her left arm. The puckered, silvered scar caught the chandelier light, ugly and plain, the brand that had made her unmarriageable, that had emptied every room she ever entered. She heard the indrawn breath of the crowd, the small cruel titter near the wall. The Duke of Thornwood took her bared, scarred hand in both of his. And he bent, this man of iron who had not bowed his head to a soul since his grief, this lord whom duchesses pursued in vain, and he pressed his lips to the burned skin of her wrist as gently as one might touch something holy. A sound went through the ballroom like wind through wheat. "This," he said, lifting his head, still holding her hand, his voice ringing now so that every corner of the great room caught it, "is the bravest woman in this house. She has stood against that wall all night and borne your unkindness without a single word of complaint, which is more dignity than I have witnessed in this room in 20 years. His dark gaze swept the crowd, and now it was iron, now it was cold, and the fan women shrank from it. "You called her unmarriageable. You were mistaken. I intend to marry her." The gasp was a single thing, an enormous shared inhalation. Lady Marchmore's knees swayed against a pillar. A teacup shattered somewhere. The cruel woman who had spoken behind her fan now stood white and stricken, her painted mouth working with no words in it, her humiliation complete and public, and exactly, Beatrice thought, as deserved. "Your Grace." Beatrice could scarcely speak. "I am a seamstress. I have nothing. You cannot, people will say." Let them say. He had not released her hand. "I have spent 2 years being told whom I ought to court. Heiresses, beauties. Women who have never once in their lives done a kind or honest thing." His thumb moved very lightly over the scar, and she felt it everywhere. "I do not want them. I want the woman who knelt on my floor and asked for nothing. I have wanted her since the afternoon she would not look." His voice dropped, meant for her alone now, though the silent room strained to catch it. "Look up now, Beatrice. Look at me." She did. "Will you have me?" the Iron Duke of Thornwood asked. "I am not an easy man. I am cold and I am proud, and I have forgotten how to be gentle to anyone but you. But I have never in my life been more certain of anything than I am of this. Marry me." The chandeliers blazed. The whole cruel glittering world that had cast her out stood frozen and watching, and Beatrice, the scarred seamstress, the unmarriageable nothing, lifted her chin the way she had lifted it all her life, and let one tear fall, and said the truest words she had ever spoken. "Yes." The Duke smiled. It was the first time in 2 years that anyone at Thornwood Hall had seen him do it, and it transformed his hard face entirely, and Lady Marchmore would later swear it was the most extraordinary thing she had witnessed in her life, though she would never admit she had been the one to call the girl unmarriageable. He drew Beatrice's hand through his arm, the scarred hand, bared for all to see, and he turned her to face the room that had whispered her down to nothing. "You will all wish my Duchess joy," he said. It was not a request. And they did. They had to. They came forward one by one, the very women who had laughed, dipping curtsies to the seamstress they had scorned an hour before, their faces a study in swallowed venom, while Beatrice received them with a grace none of them could have matched. She did not gloat. She did not need to. The bowing of every proud head in that room was answer enough to a lifetime of being looked past. Later, when the carriages had rattled away and the candles guttered low, the Duke led her out onto the terrace where the night air was cold and clean and no one could overhear. "You should not have done it," she said softly. Before all of them, you have made an enemy of half the county. I have made a wife of the woman I love. He turned her hand over in his and looked down at the scar as though it were the dearest thing he owned. I have spent a great deal of my life being feared, Beatrice. I find I would rather, for whatever years I am given, be loved instead. By you. Only by you. She looked up at the hard, weary, gentle face of the Iron Duke of Thornwood, the man who had crossed a whole ballroom to claim the hand the world had taught her to hide, and she understood at last that the fire which had marked her had not ruined her after all. It had only been waiting all these years to lead her here. He bent his head, and in the dark beyond the candlelight, where no cruel eye could follow, the Iron Duke kissed the woman he had chosen above the whole glittering world, and held her as though he would never, for as long as he lived, let her go. And he never did.